We're getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camila Tomy Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Farage with me, Camila Tomy. My final night presenting this show. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for your company again tonight and indeed all week. What are we going to be covering? Well, of course, Matt Hancock's appearance at the COVID inquiry is going to be a topic for discussion. The Health Secretary blaming some of the government's mistakes on the toxic atmosphere inside Number 10. We're also going to be talking about COP28, the climate summit in Dubai, of all places, where King Charles III has just arrived. And we're going to be discussing what on earth has happened to 17,000 missing asylum seekers. All that after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. It's Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. 2 more hostages have been released from Gaza on the 7th day of the temporary ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Earlier, the women, a 21-year-old French dual national and a 40-year-old Israeli, arrived at a hospital back in Israel. We're also expecting more captives held by Hamas to be released later in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. Talks to extend the truce are continuing in Qatar. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has once again vowed to eradicate the Hamas terror group after it claimed responsibility for a shooting that killed 3 people in Jerusalem. At least 8 others were injured in the attack. It took place at a bus stop during rush hour outside the entrance to the capital city. Police say the 2 suspected attackers were neutralised on the spot by off-duty officers. Here in the UK, Matt Hancock's told the COVID inquiry the first lockdown should have been imposed 3 weeks earlier than it was. The former Health Secretary claimed many, many lives could have been saved.
If we'd had the doctrine that I propose, which is as soon as you know you've got a lockdown, you lock down as soon as possible, then we would have got the lockdown done over that weekend, in on the 2nd of March, 3 weeks earlier than before. There's a doubling rate at this point estimated every 3 to 4 days. We would have been 6 doublings ahead of where we were, which means that fewer than a tenth of the number of people would have died in the first wave.
A world-first online fraud charter is being launched to tackle digital scams. The Home Secretary met representatives from leading tech companies like Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat and YouTube to sign the pledge. The charter will introduce a number of measures to better protect users, including verifying new advertisers and removing fraudulent content swiftly. James Cleverly says it's a culmination of a huge amount of work.
Working together, we are seeking to achieve what they want, which is a reduction of fraud on their platforms, what we want, which is a reduction of fraud against British people. There's a mutual benefit here. That's why they're working with us. That's why they've engaged with Anthony Brown and the British government. And that's why we are holding this world-first signing of joint work to drive down online fraud.
Former Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling has died at the age of 70. Lord Darling served as a cabinet minister for 13 years under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, becoming Chancellor in 2007 and steering the UK through the global financial crash. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says his death's been met with profound sadness.
Alistair's death has caused a shock and a profound sadness across not just the whole Labour movement, but across everybody who loved him and respected him. And that's basically everybody who knew him. He was the dedicated public servant. He was kind. I was privileged to know him as a friend and to have his advice. And our hearts go out to Maggie, his wife, and their children on this very, very sad day.
Shane McGowan, the frontman of the Pogues, has died at the age of 65. He was discharged from hospital last week after being diagnosed with encephalitis. The singer, who was born on Christmas Day, is best known for the 1987 hit Fairy Tale of New York. Elvis Costello once bet the Irishman he couldn't write a Christmas hit, while McGowan promptly wrote and performed one of the most cherished festive songs. He died peacefully with his wife by his side. Rail passengers are being warned to expect disruption over the coming week because of strikes. And that's despite the RMT members voting to accept a deal to end their long-running dispute. However, train drivers represented by the ASLEF union at 16 rail operators are set to hold an overtime ban from tomorrow. And the Prime Minister switched on the lights of Downing Street and the Christmas tree there.
3, 2, 1.
Well, Rishi Sunak joked it was nice to click a button and make everything brighter. The Christmas carols were played as more than 100 guests attended a festive market in Downing Street a little earlier. Well, this is GB News, live across the UK on TV, digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it for the moment. Now it's over to Camilla.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Well, welcome back. It's me, Camila Tomy, covering for Nigel Farage tonight. And we're going to be speaking about the COVID inquiry because former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is being given evidence. Let's just pick out some of the highlights. I can see why people felt I was overconfident, he told the inquiry. He blamed largely Dominic Cummings for the toxic culture at Number 10. He said we should have locked down 3 weeks earlier, and he insisted that he had told Boris Johnson that the country should lock down as early as March the 13th, 2020. This is what he said.
I've had the chance to check because you questioned the phone call I made to the Prime Minister. It was at 3:34 that afternoon. I've been at 3:24. I've been able to check my phone records, which have I've come to light since.
No, Mr. Hancock. You know perfectly well that we have scoured every possible source for documents and material relevant to the issues in this inquiry. Are you saying that you have a record of a phone call which you've not disclosed to this inquiry?
No, there isn't. There's only a record that the phone call took place.
So you don't know what you said in that phone call?
I do.
All right.
So that rather testy exchange with the lawyer there may raise questions about Matt Hancock's testimony. And my audience question tonight is a quite simple one. Do you believe him? Do you believe what he's been telling the inquiry today? Get in touch with me. You can email farage@gbnews.com or tweet #Farage on GB News. Well, let's bring Professor Carl Hennigan into the conversation. He's the director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford. I know, Carl, that you went in and you did advise Boris Johnson at one stage, but then because you were sceptical about lockdown, you were rather frozen out of the process. I wonder, in general, what you make of the inquiry. You wrote a piece for The Spectator where you basically asked, what's the point of it? Are you still of that opinion, Professor?
Well, look, I think we always sort of thought about government, it was a bit disorganised and dysfunctional. But this is a window into how it works, and it's at a whole new level of distrust and dysfunctionality. So we're able to see the workings of government that we've never seen before. So I also think what's happening, though, is we're looking at government decision-making, and what's happening is everybody's blaming everybody. The advisors are blaming the ministers, the civil servants are blaming everybody. And at this point, I thought what happened here with Hancock is Patrick Vallance had it nailed on the head. He said he has a habit of saying things which he didn't have a basis for. And the key point there was Hugo Keith was saying, hold on a minute, you had a book that said this was the whole truth. This was the pandemic, the raw details of it. And in there, he never mentioned anything about the 13th of March and the immediate lockdown and the call with the Prime Minister. And now all of a sudden, he's pulled it out of the bag. So I think, actually, how can we trust these people on hearsay? And I have to say, most of the things that Hancock said today, I just found them, we didn't learn anything, any lessons whatsoever.
Did you find it as interesting as I did, Professor, that in the week questions were asked, I think, by Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, about the origins of the virus, wanted the inquiry to perhaps look into whether it was man-made in China, and he was quickly told, no, sorry, this isn't what the inquiry's dealing with. Well, if it isn't dealing with that very central question, one could argue what the point of it is, actually.
So I think, Camilla, there are two central questions. You're right. If it is man-made, and that's what they considered the issues were, you can understand why they were much more concerned about locking down if they're suddenly saying, we've got this virus, we've got these research institutes in China that can do gain of function, and they're creating bioweapons. You could understand the panic and the alarm that occurred. I think that's one issue. The second issue that the inquiry has to do is start asking the questions, did lockdowns work? Because amongst people like Hancock, there's a belief that lockdowns work. And therefore, all we need is more lockdown, do it harder and faster next time. And actually, if you start looking at the evidence, that unravels really quickly. But I actually think Hancock's statements today was thrown in to distract everybody and say, I had the opportunity and the answer, and I could have created a massive difference if you'd only listened to me. And that was a distraction technique because he was just pulling a number out of the fresh air as far as I'm concerned.
Carl Hennigan, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Lloyd Morlin joins me now. He's a Conservative peer. He's a former advisor to Boris Johnson, who, of course, is appearing at the inquiry next week. Out of interest, have you spoken to him about his imminent appearance?
I have not.
No. And how do you think he should handle it? Because as Carl Hennigan has just illustrated, it has become a blame game, this. You've got the scientists blaming the government. You've got the government blaming the scientists. No doubt Mr Johnson is going to be placed in a precarious position for 2 days in the stand when it appears to me as if this inquiry is somewhat of a foregone conclusion. The inquiry is leaning in favour of the idea that we didn't lock down soon enough or hard enough. So how do you think your friend and ally is going to fare?
Well, I don't know. I think that Lady Hallett has lost control of the inquiry, and I think actually it should be wound up.
Really?
I don't think this inquiry is going anywhere. It seems to me the first purpose of Mr Keith in asking his questions, one old Etonian to another, is basically to ensure that Boris Johnson can never come back into political life. That seems to me what the inquiry is.
I mean, he'd defend himself. You're saying that he's ideologically motivated to destroy Boris Johnson.
I'm not saying he's ideologically motivated. I'm saying he's only interested in gotcha questions to try and humiliate anyone who appears in front of him.
I mean, he'll be arguing, Lord Boylan, that he's there to find answers out about how the government responded to this pandemic.
Yeah, he'll say that's what he'll say, but he isn't actually doing that because he isn't looking at government functionality as a whole. He isn't looking at it from the point of view of a Prime Minister or indeed a health secretary, and I have no idea whether Matt Hancock made that phone call or not.
What's your suspicion?
Who is? I don't have suspicions, but he isn't answering. Looking at it from the point of view of people who are dealing with something where they're getting contrary advice the whole time and want to weigh it up, and aren't getting the tools from people to allow them to weigh it up. They're just being shouted at in one ear by one person and the other ear by somebody else, and they've got to make that decision. The other assumption here is that it matters whether Matt Hancock said we should. It doesn't matter. There seem to be people out there who think that if we'd locked down a week earlier than we did, because I think we locked down on the 20th, if we'd, there was an informal lockdown on the 20th, I think, and a week later it became legal. If we'd done it all a week earlier, that somehow nobody would have died. I mean, it's all fantasy.
Yes.
You know, these tiny adjustments, these tiny decisions about whether something should be brought forward by a few days or not was going to have a material effect on what happened.
Yes.
I'm sure there were things the government did wrong. Matt Hancock has admitted that this idea that elderly people being moved out of hospitals were going to be safe was wrong. And there was a great deal of cruelty involved in that. And there were, you know, they have victims groups here, victims groups who represent people who lost families to COVID, lost family members to COVID, but they don't seem to have victims groups of parents whose children's education was disrupted.
Or even people who lost lives
things,
because of COVID because they couldn't get treated for other things.
Because they get treated for cancer and for things like that. Those people don't seem to be represented. So the bias is in there. And these are decisions by Lady Hallett. Who gets represented decisions for her.
But we must scrutinise the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, and how he handled this pandemic.
What his advice would be. My advice is he should tell the truth as he saw it from where he was.
How do you think he handled the pandemic? Because he was ill during a period at the beginning of it, but you'll be familiar with the kind of Matt Lucas lampooning of, you know, stay indoors, don't stay indoors. It was all very confusing. Did he manage it adequately?
I think once the decision to have a lockdown was made, I think Boris actually led that very well. I think he communicated the government's decision well to the public, and I think that at the early stages he had a lot of respect for doing it. He did fall ill later, but that was a bit later.
Yes.
That was a bit later.
But didn't he squander his sort of libertarian principles on the altar of following the science? And wouldn't he now reflect and think that actually if he'd had more courage to stick to his guns and his instincts were to do a Sweden and not have the lockdowns that we ended up having, he'd have fared a lot better? You wouldn't have had Partygate, would you?
I don't know whether he thinks that now. But I would think that now. I mean, I would have supported, I'd have gone along. I was persuaded by the argument for lockdown early on, just as a member of the public. I don't have any special scientific knowledge to bring to bear on this. But the big question about lockdown from the outset, the people were asking, and Boris was asking, was how do you get out of it?
Yes.
How do you bring the lockdown to an end? And nobody had an answer to that. And that was a question of crucial importance, both for public morale, public health, and public finances and the state of the economy, which we're all still suffering from, loaded with debt as a result, which is inhibiting our economic life, loaded with debt even now and for years to come as a result of a decision to go into a lockdown with no clear plan how you come out of it. And the whole test, trace and isolate thing was always going to be a fantasy.
So any inquiry, to conclude, really needs to answer the central question, which this one doesn't seem to, was the cure worse than the disease?
That is absolutely a crucial question. And the other one, just to support Carl Hennigan, if you want to plan for a future pandemic, it's absolutely crucial you know how the pandemic you're looking at started, and they don't seem to be remotely interested.
Lloyd Moylan, thank you very much indeed for joining me in the studio this evening. Well, coming up next, we're going to be discussing COP28. How many private jets do you think our leaders took to get to Dubai? And we'll also be discussing that astonishing story, the Home Office losing track of 17,000 asylum seekers. That's all next. Stay tuned.
You know, I've been a pop star, I've been a TV presenter, I've danced on Strictly, I've faced some of my biggest fears on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to face my biggest challenge of all by joining GB News with Ellie Costello and Peter Andre.
For the brightest start to your weekend with all the news, the biggest stories, plus some special guests,
Join me, Peter Andre.
And me, Ellie Costello, for Saturday Morning Live from 10.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camila Tomy Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camila Tomy. Earlier in the programme, I asked you whether you believed Matt Hancock. He had made a number of claims to the inquiry, including the fact that he'd flagged on March the 13th, 2020, the need to lock down with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. That was disputed at the inquiry by the lawyer. Mary says in response, the COVID inquiry is a waste of time. It is irrelevant whether or not anyone believes Hancock. Opinion should not be of any relevance at all. Facts only should matter. Another viewer says this inquiry is ridiculous. It's just a blame game instead of learning what should be done if it happens again. And Pamela says, yes, Camilla, I think he's lying. I do not trust him at all. Well, there you have it. And don't forget that Boris Johnson will be appearing at that inquiry next week, and it'll all be covered on GB News. Now, let's speak about COP28. Now, the annual summit, which we know was in Glasgow for COP26, we hosted it, would you believe will now have the biggest carbon footprint in the history of the annual climate summit, because the UAE has invited record numbers of people. Experts have said at least 400,000 people are expected to travel to Dubai, that centre of climate conscience. For the 2-week event, organisers have said the biggest attendance on record. I asked you earlier how many private jets it takes to send UK leaders out there. 3, it seems. We had David Cameron on one, apparently, Rishi Sunak on another, and the King on a third. which strikes me as being rather counterintuitive to the impetus behind this summit. Let's bring Rupert Reed into the conversation. He's the co-director of the Climate Majority Project. Rupert, I presume you're not in favour of this summit because it's in oil-rich Dubai.
Yeah, it's a disaster all around, really, isn't it? And it's quite ridiculous, as you say, our so-called leaders taking these private jets out there separately. They could at least get in one together. Dubai is about the worst place in the world for having a COP meeting. It's very discredited because the boss of the whole COP and his company have basically been caught trying to make oil deals at the climate summit. It's a very bad look. And that's why, as you say, in the Climate Majority Project, we say this whole process is not what we need. What we actually need is for governments and localities and citizens to get down and dirty in the ground, in the dirt, growing food, guarding against flood risk, storing water, doing the kind of things that are necessary to protect us against the climate damage that we all know is here, and the worst climate damage that is coming. You know, we've all experienced now things like floods, the extremes of temperatures last summer. It's time to actually get down and dirty, doing the work that needs to be done together to protect ourselves against this.
OK. I mean, the Prime Minister has distanced himself from what he's described as ideological zealots. Obviously, we've seen a lot of activity from the likes of Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, but actually that hasn't really advanced the cause at all, has it? Since Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion started stopping people from commuting to work and throwing orange powder about the place, the government's actually watered down its climate commitments. So this kind of climate activism, this extremism, is totally counterproductive, isn't it?
Well, I think you've got to make one or two distinctions. Extinction Rebellion in 2019 raised the issue and forced a national conversation, but that was 4 years ago. So I think the question you're asking is fair. Do we still need more and more radical climate activism now? What we say in the Climate Majority Project is anyone who thinks it's time for something other than that kind of activism, well, we're here for you. We're here for everybody who, as I was saying a minute ago, wants to take action in their local communities to make those communities more resilient. Or also action at work. That's what more and more people are doing, is looking to make their work, their businesses, their profession climate resilient and climate friendly. That's where the real action is now, in our view.
Well, you say action is in local communities, but aren't Brits doing enough in comparison to, say, countries like China and India? There's been a recent report out suggesting that there have been 5 million deaths as a result of air pollution. Most of them are occurring in China and India. So the UK is doing a great job. India and China need to do a lot more, don't they?
No, the way I put it is this. India and China need to do a lot more, but the UK is not doing a great job. The UK is doing a terrible job. Yeah, we don't have as many air pollution deaths as those countries. But our record
But we've reduced our carbon emissions substantially, haven't we?
We've reduced our climate emissions not as much as people think, because a lot of our climate emissions
since the 1960s.
A lot of our climate emissions we've just exported over that period to China and India. So we need to be reducing our emissions a lot more. But as I say, it's also about adaptation. It's about resilience building. And there again, the UK has got a really terrible record. It's been condemned by its own official committee on climate change.
Yeah, although you'd imagine that the average Brit is probably quite good at recycling compared to somebody living in China or India. We have to leave it there, Mr. Reed. Thank you very, very much for your time this evening.
Yeah, it's not about recycling. It goes further than that.
Well, I think recycling's part of it, isn't it? I mean, here we are doing our best, and yet at the same time, China are building yet more coal-fired power stations. And yet Extinction Rebellion think people who go to galleries are the problem, or indeed Wimbledon. Or maybe that was Just Stop Oil. They all meld into one, don't they? Now, let's go on to the next story now. We talked about it a little bit last night. It's this extraordinary exchange that took place at the Home Affairs Select Committee yesterday, where some officials didn't seem to know what had happened to 17,000 asylum seekers who have withdrawn their applications. Let's just be reminded of exactly what happened.
We have no record of that 307% increase. The 17,316 claims withdrawn in the last year. You haven't a clue where those people now are.
So these are people who have made a claim.
who we have sought to invite to interviews, or we have sent out questionnaires, who have not responded, and the point at which they are not engaging with the system that leads to a decision, we have withdrawn their claim.
So you tick them off the list, but they haven't gone home.
They haven't
gone home.
I don't know.
We don't know. So you have no idea where those 17,316 people are.
I don't think we know where all those people are, no.
You have no idea. Thank you very much, Chair.
Well, the person quizzing those clueless Home Office officials was Tim Lawton, the MP for East Worthing and Shoreham and the former chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Tim, what a shambles.
Wasn't very impressive, was it? And we had the top two people from the Home Office, the Permanent Secretary, very experienced, and the new second in command, appearing in front of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Not a surprise. We're going to ask lots of questions about migrant figures, how we're doing against the people smugglers, boats coming across the Rwanda scheme. And question after question was met with a sort of blank expression and a look of surprise, as they just had no idea. And then specifically these figures about reducing the legacy numbers, which is good. The government's made quite a lot of progress on that because they've speeded up the processing time. But that sort of slightly disguises the fact there's a whole load of people who have apparently withdrawn their application. Fine. So where are they?
Yes.
And I suspect they haven't all gone home. And clearly the Home Office doesn't know where they are at all, which is quite worrying.
And also presumably doesn't really know what kinds of people they are. I mean, people could have come over and sought asylum under false pretences. They could have, I don't know, a criminal past. I mean, goodness me, they could be potential enemies of this state. And yet the Home Office isn't able to track them at all.
Well, hopefully not, because these are people who have all registered a claim. So they are on the records. So they're not just completely anonymous people, although some people may be on a false identity, but they should have lodged a claim and they should have had their identity verified. It was then a question of waiting for that claim to go through. There are two ways then that you withdraw the claim, and 95% of the people in the last quarter have done it by either signing a form with the Home Office that says, I no longer wish to make a claim, or going home. Now, for those people who've left, hopefully Immigration Border Force have got a record that they've left. For the 95% of people who've actually signed a physical form, I don't know what those forms look like, nor did the officials yesterday. It probably has got something on about, a contact details, contact address, so they can make sure that they've moved back to their home country or whatever, to keep track of them. But we don't know. The senior officials from the Home Office didn't know quite a straightforward and quite an important question, frankly.
Tim, can I just ask you about the Home Office? I remember back in, I think it was 2006, John Reid, the former Home Secretary under Labour, under Tony Blair, said that the Home Office wasn't fit for purpose. Is that still the case, do you think?
I think that's a pretty fair description still. It's certainly, I think, the most dysfunctional department in government, and has been for a long time under various different governments. I mean, I've sat on the Home Affairs Select Committee for about 9 years now, so I've seen lots of Home Secretaries come and go. I've seen lots of Permanent Secretaries come and go. And this performance yesterday, I think, was one of the most woeful performances I've seen from senior civil servants ever. Is really not good enough in a department that is doing really important stuff, the high-profile problems we've got on immigration and small boats, which the Prime Minister has quite rightly made an absolute imperative, and some progress is being made in reducing the number of boats coming across. But then you just get a complete shambles of performance like this, which just raises questions about how thorough and robust are the figures that we're being given anyway. So this was not good enough from the Home Office at all.
No, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence in Rishi Sunak's ambition to stop the boats. Tim Lawton, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening and for asking those Home Office officials those punchy questions. Now, we're at the moment in the show where we say, what the Farage, or as I've renamed it, can you believe it? And I must admit my reaction to seeing this headline just before I came on air was, can you believe it? Saskia Peters, the Dutch translator of Omid Scobie's book Endgame, has told the Mail Online, and I quote, "As a translator, I translate what is in front of me. The names of the royals were there in black and white. I did not add them. I just did what I was paid to do, and that was translate the book from English into Dutch." Now, this is curious, isn't it? Because Scobie has said, and I quote, "I never submitted a book that had those names in it." So how on earth could these names of these alleged royal racists have ended up in the Dutch translation if they weren't in the English? And can Scobie really justify saying that the translator made the error? Can you believe it? Probably sums up this sorry saga. Hopefully we won't need to speak about this book anymore because it appears to be being widely discredited, not just in the UK, but across the world. But what the Farage? It was the translator's fault, and she says no. Who'd have thunk it? Anyway, that's that saga for now. A little later in the show, we're going to be speaking to somebody about this horrendous shooting in Jerusalem. Has it disrupted the truce that's been agreed between Hamas and indeed the Israelis? We'll have more on that next.
On State of the Nation tonight at 8 o'clock. As world leaders get in their private jets to Dubai for COP28 to tell us all we should be using less fuel, why do we keep relinquishing our precious sovereignty to unelected, quasi-political, jet-set bureaucrats? Another tough day for the Home Office as it's revealed 17,000 illegal migrants have disappeared into thin air without a trace. And yet another setback for the Rwanda plan, plus another boost for Brexit Britain. Our newfound freedoms could be seeing the return of pints of wine and champagne Sir Winston Churchill enjoyed, and Champagne Charlie would be delighted by. Tune in tonight at 8 o'clock.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back to Farage with me, Camila Tomy. Earlier today, 3 people were killed and 16 others injured after Hamas gunmen opened fire on a bus stop in Jerusalem. Off-duty soldiers and a civilian at the scene killed the gunmen. Hamas claimed the pair as its own members and said the attack was a response to Israeli crimes in Gaza and elsewhere. Now, Hodaya Afzada joins me now. She's head of domestic affairs and civil society at the Israeli embassy in London. Thank you for being with me this evening.
Thank you for having me.
What does this say about the temporary truce that's been reached between Hamas and the Israelis, that a crime like this can be carried out at a bus stop in Jerusalem?
Well, it is disturbing that this is happening today, actually, while we're still in the truth. But our priority right now is to bring back our hostages, to bring back our people, to unite families that have been separated.
Yes.
And have been kept in horrible conditions for over 50 days. So we are hoping to bring more of the hostages back as long as Hamas will be able and willing to release those hostages, then the truce will last.
And so Israel isn't treating this incident as having broken that truce?
As far as my understanding goes, the truce continues until now.
I know you've been heavily involved not only with some of the hostages that have come back home, but also those who are still waiting for news of their loved ones. Can you give us an insight into, first of all, how are the hostages who have been returned doing?
Well, so I have been spending the last 3 days accompanying families of hostages and victims of the October 7th massacre. And I can see that they're in a very fragile situation, the families of the hostages and the victims. It's a very complex situation. A lot of them have family members who have returned from captivity after about 7 weeks, but they still have family members who have been separated from them and kept there. So while they are happy might be a strong word, but they have certain relief. For those who have returned, they still worried sick about those who are still held captive by Hamas.
We saw, and it's gone viral on social media, the image of that one female hostage who gave a look of defiance to her captors. And many people in the Jewish community sort of said that she was Jew of the century for the way that she bravely sort of stared this guy in the face. She's left her husband behind, though. So there's quite a lot of situations where some people are kind of celebrating the joy of being reunited with their loved ones, but then experiencing the pain of knowing that they've still got family members held captive.
Yeah, like I said, joy is a bit of a strong word because these people are in the most unimaginable situation. This woman that you've mentioned has left her husband behind, and it has been reported that she didn't want to leave him, but Hamas has been staging this as in the most cruel way, setting people off with bottles of water and making it look like they've been kept in a humane situation. But this is all an act. We must not forget that. Hamas.
What conditions were some of the hostages held in? What do you know about that?
So they're still very much unknown, but we are starting to hear stories and reports. Obviously, we have to be very sensitive with that because there are still people held there at the moment. We have heard from children, especially who have returned, that they are still whispering because they were forced to keep quiet during all of that time. People were held in really difficult conditions. Obviously, no medical treatment at all, no medication. Some people are in needs of daily medical treatment, which they've not been getting. Some people are elderly.
Yes, well, a lot of elderly people had been held captive, Holocaust survivors, women of 85, 86 years old.
Yeah.
What hope is there in terms of timing? How quickly do you hope to repatriate some of the other hostages there? It seems to be a system where it's women and children first. It's kind of going from the most vulnerable to the least vulnerable. That, of course, is hugely difficult for people who've got male hostages in captivity. But how hopeful are you that you can have these hostages returned to their homes in the next couple of weeks?
I can say that this is a top priority for our government and for our people. We see that the people of Israel have been very much supportive of this cause, and we feel like, you know, those people are part of our families as well. We feel connected to them in so many ways, and everyone in Israel are very much worried about those people. We've seen, you've talked about old people, and we've seen one of the more older ladies who have returned from captivity is still in a critical, life-threatening condition in a hospital because she was treated poorly. So the hope is to release as many of them as possible. Obviously, like you said, the women and children were released first, but there are a lot of them who might be younger and wounded, who got wounded during the attack and in needs of critical medical treatment. So those are priority as well. Obviously, we want them all back as soon as possible.
Bring them home was, of course, the chant that we heard at the March Against Anti-Semitism last Sunday. Hodaya, thank you very much for joining us, not least because I know you've got your work cut out at the moment.
Thank you for having me.
Well, coming up next, we're going to have the latest from the jungle, what happened to Nigel in that trial yesterday, where he had to shout, "I'm a celeb." And we're also going to be speaking to former I'm a Celeb winner, Kerry Katona. Stay tuned for that.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camila Tomy Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Farage with me, Camila Tomy. Now, God love Nige. I watched it last night. He was trying to get these stars off the middle of this water tank, and I was willing him on like the rest of the nation, I think, but he just couldn't hold his breath. So let's find out what exactly happened with Ben Leo, who is in the Gold Coast, or on the Gold Coast, I should say, in Australia. GB News reporter extraordinaire, doing his bit on the jungle. Ben, what happened?
Yeah, so he was tasked with basically dunking his head underwater and unscrewing stars for his campmates to get meals for them. But he couldn't seem to hold his breath for longer than 5 seconds. I said on breakfast this morning, I don't know if it's anything to do with the fact he smokes like a trooper, maybe, but he just couldn't do it. And it's a stark contrast to his previous Bush Tucker trials where he's absolutely smashed them, whether it's downing, you know, disgusting drinks or eating camel anus or, you know, everything else. He was fine with that, but as soon as it came to the water, and admittedly he did look very nervous before the trial started, he just couldn't do it. I felt very sorry for him, but this is the moment he cried defeat and said, "I'm a celebrity, get me out of here."
Max, is that a pass?
I'm out.
I'm a celebrity.
I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. I can't do it.
He's calling it. I'm a celebrity, get me out of here.
Can't do it.
Stop the clock. Okay, right, let's get you out of there.
Let's get him out. All right, Nigel, you all right, mate? Can't bloody do it.
Okay, Nigel's called it now. You.
So, unfortunately, Nigel got 0 stars, so his contribution was paltry, to say the least. He was very downbeat about it. He went back into camp and he genuinely looked gutted. He said, "I've let the side down," which gives a glimpse into his you know, sort of team player attitude. Elsewhere, the cavalry has arrived. Nigel's daughter touched down in Brisbane yesterday ahead of the next week of evictions, which will start any day now. His 18-year-old daughter Izzy said to reporters, "I think he's been getting on really well, and now people are seeing what he's actually like. It's been nice to see him broadly getting along with everyone." Wink, wink, Nella Rose. There's been a few disagreements, but he very much believes in shaking hands and agreeing to disagree, and we've seen that firsthand. He's a divisive character, so it's love or hate, but now it seems there's a bit of middle ground. So it seems he's definitely won over his kids. Elsewhere, I don't know if you've got the pictures, maybe not, but because I sent them quite late, but I've been going through my own Aussie punishment around here. Yesterday, Camilla, when I did my broadcast with you at 7 p.m. Yesterday, I was getting eaten alive by sand flies, which I've had quite a strange reaction to. I've got these massive lumps which look like something rather sinister, but apparently because I'm a tourist and I'm not used to getting bitten by these flies, they've come up looking absolutely gruesome. So that's my own punishment. And yeah, as I said, in terms of the trials and the next evictions, it all kicks off this weekend, hopefully. So by the way, keep your eyes on the phone number as well to vote for Nigel, because you need to vote for him to stay in the camp. So when we have that number, I'm sure GB News will be broadcasting it everywhere.
I'm sure we will, Ben. Thank you very much. I like the attempt to make out as if working in Australia has been a real drag. And thank goodness, by the way, those bites were on your legs and not somewhere else, because I think we've seen enough bottoms this week from GB News presenters to last a lifetime. Now, let's bring Kerry Katona into the conversation, former Atomic Kitten and I'm a Celebrity winner, I think, Kerry, in 2004. A long time ago. Kerry, how do you think Nigel's doing?
You know what? I've met Nigel. I absolutely adore him. Again, we don't always agree on everything. I think he's done really well. And I think with him being a big smoker, I don't think he could handle the water. But apart from that, he has done tremendous. He's always come out with the stars. He's worked really hard. He's tried his very best to get on with everybody. And when there has been a disagreement that he hasn't understood, he's tried to educate himself on different things. And I think he's done really well. I love him. I think I might even vote for him.
Well, I hope so. I mean, we want lots of people to vote for him. How nerve-wracking is it when you get into the second week and you know that people are voting, and obviously you've got your numbers on your back? Do you live in fear of being voted out?
Not at all. To this day, I can't even... I do not know how I won that show. I just couldn't believe I stayed till the end. On the final night, I just kept thinking, oh my God, I'm going home tomorrow. I'm going home tomorrow. I wasn't even bothered about winning. I just thought, I'm going to go see my kid. Winning wasn't even in my head. To this day, I can't believe it lasted that long.
Yeah. But you won because you were charming and amusing and you got on with everyone and you were fun to watch. I mean, it is an opportunity, isn't it, for people to show a different side to themselves. Do you think Nigel succeeded in doing that? I mean, obviously, she's either loved or hated by the general public, and actually maybe people have seen the real Nigel during this series.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a newfound respect for Nigel, massively. You know, he is just a human being. He's a man, he's a dad, he's trying his hardest, he's a team player. You can clearly see he's a team player. He's trying to keep everybody happy. He doesn't want to let anybody down. And I think definitely, I mean, I never went in that for people to see a different side of me. Every time I do a show like that, I just think, oh my God, what a great adventure. You know, so I think when you do shows like this, for a lot of people who go on there, you've just got to be yourself, because the public will see right through it. So, and I think he's being himself, and I'm loving those little bottom clips that we keep seeing. I'm going to have a little post on my wall of Nigel's bottom.
You might be alone on that one, Kerry. Look, talking about perhaps showing a different side of yourself, my understanding is now that you're doing lots of different things and you're actually doing really well on OnlyFans. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, that's Nigel. That's Nigel, he'll tell you.
Oh, really? I think you're giving away a bit too much there. Goodness me. But it's proving to be lucrative for you, Kerry.
Yes, it has. You know, I started off as a glamour model. You know, I don't do anything on there that I don't do on a beach. You know, what annoys me with the stigma around OnlyFans is people are very quick and willing to go pay a ticket to go watch something with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise and Eyes Wide Shut. And that's classed as a bit of art, darling. Let's give you an Oscar and pay you tens of millions of pounds. And, you know, and I show a bit of a nipple. Oh, my God, you're a disgrace. Take your kids away from you. You know, I used to do Nuts and Zoo and FHM, and that's not around anymore.
Yeah.
So, you know, I could go on a beach topless, building sandcastle with my kids, the paps will get a picture of it, and I make no money. So, you know, look, I wasn't going to be a rocket scientist, was I? So I'm using what I was given.
Well, it wasn't your band, but I'd like to say girl power to you. Thank you very much, Kerry, for joining us this evening and sharing it all with us. Well, coming up next is State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob,
hello.
What's coming up?
What's coming up? We're going to be talking about COP28 and everybody flying off in private jets and 70,000 people being there.
3 different private jets. Cameron in one, Rishi in another, and then the King in a third. I mean, is that right?
Well, I think the King deserves his own jet, but you would have thought the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary might have been able to
Hang on, the King is an eco-warrior. He should be travelling on commercial airlines.
He's the King. He can do what he likes. But there will be so much hot air produced, and it's all actually about bossing us about by unelected, unaccountable people. 70,000 people going on some great shindig to make less well-off people poorer and colder. I think this is all bonkers.
It's completely bonkers. And actually, we spoke to that climate activist earlier, and this report has found that the most people who are most adversely affected by climate change are, of course, those in China and India, who don't seem to take any action at all compared to the Brits.
Well, but also energy usage makes people more comfortable. So the standard of living in China and India has been rising dramatically because they've had access to more energy, used more energy in the last 20 or 30 years. And why should we condemn them to poverty and discomfort and not allow them to reach the standard of living that we've reached, which requires lots of energy?
So COP28, and then very quickly, what else are you looking
Well, we're also going to be talking about the ability of getting back pints of champagne.
Oh, wow. Well, I know you like drinking champagne out of a tankard.
You're quite right, which is a pint-sized tankard.
You think I'm joking? I've actually seen Jacob drinking champagne out of a tankard. We better leave it there. We're very much looking forward to your show. Thank you for having me this week. I've thoroughly enjoyed covering for Nigel. Don't forget, I've got my own show Sunday morning, 9:30 a.m, when I'll be grilling ministers. What's not to love? First, here's the weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Friday is going to be another dry day for many of us, but it will be feeling very cold once again, with potentially some freezing fog to start and some snow showers. We've seen snow as a result of this frontal system bumping into the cold air across parts of the southwest. That will clear away throughout the course of the night, but it will leave with it a risk of ice on the roads across parts of Devon and Cornwall. There's also a risk of some ice across the northeast of England England as well as many eastern areas of Scotland as a result of the snow showers. You could also see some icy stretches across parts of Northern Ireland. So there'll be another very cold start tomorrow morning. It could be as low as -7, -8 once again. There'll also be some freezing fog patches across many central and eastern areas. These could be quite slow to clear. There'll also be some showers starting to come in across parts of Suffolk. We could see some sleetiness within this as well. But for many of us, it will be a dry day with some winter sunshine, but temperatures still really struggling, 2 or 3 degrees at best in many places. And then Saturday is going to start on a very cold note. We could be down as low as minus double digits. Some crisp sunshine to be had, mostly across northeastern areas this time, with showers moving in from the west. These showers could fall as snow over the high ground of Wales and potentially across central areas as well. But things turn somewhat less cold early next week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.